What long-held scientific assertions were refuted only within the last 10 years? A draining lymphatic system of the brain was discovered in just approximately 2016. Before that, it was thought that there was no lymphatic system in the brain. Wild that we are still discovering major systems of human anatomy this recently. The glymphatic system is a series of spaces that allow CSF to exchange with the fluid compartment surrounding neurons. It's not an organ or cellular structure, it's more like a process that allows fluid to move effectively throughout the brain and drain waste. The spaces around blood vessels in the brain become engorged during sleep, allowing fluid to more quickly perfuse the brain. It was only discovered recently because cadavers don't have active physiologic processes occurring. The glymphatic system deposits waste into the lymphatic tissues that surround the brain and spine, located in the meninges. The glymphatic system, unlike the lymphatic system which gets cleared out through motion physical activity, the glymphatic system gets cleared out through sleep. Like enough proper sleep, those of us who practice not sleeping well or enough pretty much just have a bunch of junk in our brains that needs sleep to clear out. The monoamine theory of depression, the theory that imbalances in things like dopamine, serotonin, GABA, etc., as the primary cause of depression. The prevailing theory now, I believe, is more related to how large amounts of stress physically damage certain areas of the brain. This can cause individuals who are vulnerable or have predisposition to develop depression or other mental disorders. Like 11,000 papers have been retracted in the last 2 years for fraud, and it's the tip of iceberg. I believe a Nobel laureate had their cancer research retracted. You have eyelashes. Living in your eyelash pores are mites. It was believed for the longest time that these mites did not have anuses and did not defecate. They would simply grow and grow until they filled with too much poop and simply popped. In the last 10 years it has been discovered that, no, these mites do in fact have anuses. This is important work. You have eyelashes. Living in your eyelash pores are mites. It was believed for the longest time that these mites did not have anuses and did not defecate. They would simply grow and grow until they filled with too much poop and simply popped. In the last 10 years it has been discovered that, no, these mites do in fact have anuses. This is important work. The exact timeline is up for debate, but the long-held Bering Strait land bridge theory for the original peopling of the Americas has been, for the most part, completely accepted as incorrect by the Archaeological Society at large starting around 2015-ish. Findings predating the culture theorized to be associated with the Bering Strait land migration timeframe, termed the Clovis culture, have been continuously discovered since the 50s, but were overall rejected by academics for the longest time. Improvement of carbon dating techniques in the 2000s, 2010s, and further work at a number of important sites in North and South America have led to a body of evidence that is pretty much undeniable. The new theory is that the original peopling of the Americas happened before the Bering Strait land bridge was accessible. These people traveled likely by small boat and hiked the Pacific coastline, working steadily all the way down to current-day Chile. The most comprehensive site supporting this is Monte Verde in Chile, which features clear remains of a settlement that predates the Clovis culture by approximately 1,000 years and features remains of 34 types of edible seaweed that were found a great distance from the site itself, supporting the idea of a migratory marine subsistence culture. The revised idea is that this first wave settled coastlines and whatever parts of the continent were habitable, not still frozen over. And after the land bridge became more available, a second and possibly third wave of migration occurred that had limited admixture with the modern-day Na peoples, assuming they are the descendants of the first wave, that the descendants of the first wave didn't just die off. There's a lot of unknowns because of the limited number of human remains found dating back that far, and the fact that the bulk of likely site locations are now underwater. But as analysis methods continue to evolve, I'm sure there will be more discoveries made in the future. It's really interesting reading. I've been doing a deep dive into it lately just out of curiosity. Edit. Just wanted to add that I'm not saying the above new theory is fact, because it isn't. It's just what makes the most sense based on the evidence available. There's a lot of unknowns just because of limited archaeological sites, limited ancient genomes for analysis, limited diversity of remaining native populations to sample for comparison, limits to the capabilities of available technology, etc., etc., etc. In 20 years, I wouldn't be surprised if this gets massively revamped to accommodate new information. As it should be. Everything's a hypothesis in archaeology. Adding to this, when I was in college approximately 2001 to 2006, I remember in my anthropology classes the profs were pretty firm that the first peopling in the Americas was 12-15K years ago at the earliest, and that was that ... Well, what do you know, last year we discovered human footprints in New Mexico that are from to 3K years ago. Clearly we know much less about early human migration than we thought. The crisis in cosmology is less than 10 years old. Basically, we had a theory about how the universe formed and how old galaxies were from observations from Hubble and other telescopes. When the James Webb Space Telescope came online, it could look way further, and it found galaxies that shouldn't exist. Then it found more and more and more. Basically, our two ways of dating galaxies no longer agree with each other, and that disagreement keeps getting larger and larger, and no one knows who is right, or more likely both are wrong. Good video primer on the subject. Most dinosaurs having had feathers is kind of a big one, considering they all are depicted as big featherless lizards. The big lizard look is so ingrained in society that we just sort of decided to ignore it. Not really a refutation, but I always thought the redefinition of a kilogram was pretty cool. Instead of relying on physical items to define a kilogram, all of which diverged in mass anyway, scientists developed a watt balance, so that a kilogram would be dependent on physical constants. I think they also changed the definition of a coulomb by some fractionally small amount. The food pyramid, they basically flipped it upside down a while back, rendering what we'd been taught for decades as utterly wrong. The head researcher for the original food pyramid was related to some head guy at Kellogg's. The researcher was paid to skew data in favor of Kellogg's products. The new food pyramid is also off, but not as bad. Boar are becoming more radioactive in the Chernobyl area due to their digging and foraging. The deer are becoming less radioactive due to their eating and above the surface. The boar are digging down far enough to hit isotopes from Russian nuclear weapons testing. Garter snakes are venomous. Doesn't quite count because it was discovered in the early 2000s. Brains not containing a lymphatic system with the discovery of meningeal lymphatic vessels. Brains not containing a lymphatic system with the discovery of meningeal lymphatic vessels. Astronomer here, the detection of gravitational waves by LIGO has been revolutionary. Among other things, we have completely changed our understanding of where the heaviest elements come from. Back in the day, I learned in astronomy that all the elements after the first three were made in supernovae, including the heaviest elements like gold and silver. In 2017, however, we detected the first merging neutron star with LIGO, and telescopes spotted it, allowing us to measure the spectrum. And turns out virtually all the heaviest elements like gold and uranium are from neutron star mergers, not supernovae. Here is the periodic table by astronomical origin of the element. I remember attending a meeting in 2018 which was handing out new copies of this, and it was the neatest thing. For comparison, here is the old version B for neutron stars. The first gravitational wave was first detected in 2015, which was the merger of two black holes. This was a bit of a surprise because people didn't think those were going to be the first detection to neutron stars, was thought much more likely, but now the LIGO signal is just dominated by them. Turns out black holes of this size just exist and merge more than people thought. That's pretty darn cool. In a grand round one listened to last year, I learned that the theory that aluminum causes Alzheimer's and dementia had been disproven, and now the focus is on pesticides. A long-standing conjecture in particle physics, supersymmetry, seems increasingly iffy based on the lack of evidence from the Large Hadron Collider. My understanding is that there are still some versions of it that are possible at even higher energies, but it was a big surprise that no new particles showed up so far. If you don't know about supersymmetry, you might have heard of string theory, which builds even further on supersymmetry. So string theory is also at risk of being experimentally disproven. Neither of these were ever based on experimental evidence so much as intriguing math, so technically they're not scientific assertions. But many very smart theoretical physicists basically took for granted that they would eventually be experimentally validated. I mentioned this in another thread, but the idea that sugar is more to blame for heart disease and other nutrition-related maladies than fat is recent, thanks in part to lobbying by the sugar industry, ruining careers in the process. My first thought was Pluto no longer being a planet, but that was 2006. I Googled it. I think a study came out within the last year that said clinical depression apparently doesn't have anything to do with imbalance in dopamine or serotonin. I can't remember which, and psychiatric drugs are mostly doctors throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks. The appendix is a useless organ. For years, it was thought to be a vestigial structure with no function, but research in the past decade has shown that it plays a role in our immune system and maintaining gut bacteria.